Okay, I think we should get started at 7 o'clock. Thank you everyone for joining us for this live streamed presentation hosted by the Pajarito Environmental Education Center, also known as PEEC, located in Los Alamos, New Mexico. And my name is Joyce Guzik, and I will be the moderator for today's presentation. And tonight's talk is being recorded. We're able to offer programming at this time because of our wonderful members and donors. So Rick Wallace is going to be speaking tonight on UFOs and Aliens, 2021 Government Report on Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. And I'm really looking forward to this presentation. So a little bit about Rick. He has a PhD in astronomy and astrophysics from UC Santa Cruz, and he worked as a staff member at Los Alamos National Laboratory for 30 years, working on physics simulations. And his hobbies include nature photography and astronomy education. So I'm going to turn it over to Rick for tonight's talk.
Okay, great. Thank you. All right, so tonight we are going to be talking about aliens. The real question, of course, is there life out there in the universe? Is there intelligent life? Are we alone? That's really what we're trying to answer. And one way of getting to that, by some people's estimation, is to determine whether or not we've been visited by alien spacecraft. And there has been a recent US government study on that. The report just came out at the end of June, and that's what we'll be talking about. Before we do that, I'd like to review just a few things about the current thinking of astrobiologists when it comes to aliens. And I'll use a few examples from science fiction to do that. But don't worry about the examples, worry about what I'm saying about the examples. The other thing is that there is some technology involved. I'm going to be showing you a number of videos of unidentified aerial phenomena, previously known as UFOs, unidentified flying objects. And so we'll look at those videos, and some of them will have explanations, some of them might not have explanations. But we'll talk a little bit about the technology involved in analyzing those videos. So the first thing I want to talk about is the fact that movie Aliens kind of began as men in rubber suits, and then it moved on to puppets, and then CGI, which of course is much more realistic. The important thing about these, though, is that people will point out that they all look like people, right? People in rubber suits or people with costumes on or something. But there are a number of astrobiologists who have tried to determine if there were alien intelligent civilizations out there with technological capabilities, what might they look like? And there are reasons why they might have certain characteristics. So for example, they're more likely, many people believe, to be predators, because hunting requires cunning, planning, ambush, and so on. If you're a predator, if you are a prey, like a deer or a rabbit, all you do is detect the danger and run. And so being a predator requires much more in terms of intelligent functions. Most likely binocular vision as well, front facing with two eyes, so you can gauge distance. And this is true for predators, for ambush as well. And then you would have a number of sensors concentrated near your brain. You might have a head, for example, with vision, hearing, taste, so on, nearby to make for a fast neurotransmission of those sensor results and the data into your brain. Most animals on Earth that are predators and meet some of these other requirements also have bilateral symmetry. Certainly are exceptions, but 99% are bilateral symmetry. That is, splitting down the middle, you have pretty much the same thing externally on the right as you do on the left. Now, we would also expect such a civilization to have something like arms or tentacles with at least three fingers on the end to manipulate tools. And it turns out that 8 legs or less makes for the most efficient locomotion. So you might expect that as well. So, you know, the movie people may not be as far off as you would think. Um, these are based on, you know, what happens if we didn't have a dinosaur that extinction event with a meteor a few million years ago. You might have dinosaur-looking people or lizards. What would happen in the future to humans if their brain continued to increase as it has in the past? Well, you might have somebody who looks something like the guy on the right here. So that might be a natural evolution of an intelligent species. Of course, the alien xenomorph is quite different, looks very different with an exoskeleton and all sorts of weird things. There are two interesting things about it, though. He still has many of those same characteristics. Clearly a predator, binocular vision, bilateral symmetry, a number of these other things. And also today with bioengineering and things like CRISPR for gene editing technology, such a crossbreed of different animals or creatures may in fact not be too far off in the future. Maybe not quite one like this, but some type of crossbreed. In addition, autonomous AI robots are certainly becoming close to a reality. Not quite there yet, but we have self-driving features in automobiles already. So people are certainly working very hard to make autonomous AI robots. And in fact, the Harvard astronomy chair proposed that Oumuamua, which was the interstellar asteroid that came through our solar system a couple of years ago, was actually an interstellar alien reconnaissance vessel. So one never knows what one might do with drones, even space drones. Puppets, of course, allow the movies to move away from human costumes. But again, remember, Yoda is still a bilateral predator, head full of sensors, binocular vision, 2 arms and 3 fingers. Now, not so much Jabba the Hutt, but he still has somewhat bilateral symmetry, arms, the 3 fingers, the head, and so on. So even when they're not trying to make something that looks human, there may be reasons aliens might look that way. Augmented human cyborgs are certainly a possibility for the future. We're already starting to see artificial vision, hearts, limbs, and so on. I personally have an artificial heart valve. So these things would certainly become more and more ubiquitous in the future. Might that be true of another alien civilization? Possibly. Could such a creature live on a very, very long voyage, sublight speed voyage to another planet? Well, that's a possibility too. And of course, there's the idea that we have extremophiles on Earth, things like tardigrades that are almost impossible to kill, that creatures like that might inhabit other places. Now, it's not clear they could create a civilization, though. So down to the real question, are UFO spacecraft piloted by intelligent aliens? Back to the, are we alone? Now, again, the government is now calling UFOs UAPs, so you'll see UAPs throughout this talk as well as UFOs, Unidentified Aerial Phenomena. This, by the way, is the 74th anniversary of the Roswell UFO incident from 1947. The official explanation was something called Project Mogul, which was a top secret project by the US Army Air Force involving microphones flown at high altitude in balloons. And the primary purpose was long distance detection of sound waves generated by the Soviet atomic bomb tests. Now, it's kind of interesting to note that this has some similarities to the infrasound detectors currently used by the Global Test Ban Monitoring Organization, CTBTO, although those are installed on the ground instead of balloons in the air because tests are now underground. But there are some similarities. It's not such a far-fetched idea. Now, the National Geographic did a survey, and at the time they did their survey, in the Harris poll in 2014, 77% of Americans, quote, believe there are signs that aliens have visited the Earth. Now, depending on which poll you want to go with, some of the more recent ones have a lower number. But I thought that was a pretty amazing number, especially since during that same poll, they found 68% of Americans believe that Jesus is God or the Son of God. So basically, more people believe in aliens having visited the Earth than in Christianity, for example. In 2013, a UFO investigation organization received over 6,000 UFO reports in the US alone. Alien proponents often believe in conspiracy type theories as well. The former president of the World Chess Organization believes that we have been visited. He was abducted to visit their planet and that they invented chess. 40,000 Americans have insured themselves against alien abduction. A few of the more prominent media folks that you may have heard of who believe that we may have been visited by aliens include Russell Crowe, Mick Jagger, Muhammad Ali, Olivia Newton-John, Sigourney Weaver, famous for the Alien movies, and others, David Bowie, Dan Aykroyd. He actually saw both aliens and the Men in Black people chasing them. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson, Tom Cruise, who is rumored to have built a $5 million alien bunker at his house in Colorado. Demi Lovato believes in both aliens and mermaids, and a number of others. So it's a popular belief. There were 80,000 UFO sightings between 1997 and 2015. This map gives you a rough idea of where some of those sightings were located. The sightings tended to be around populated centers, whether that means it's because there are more people there, so they see us more weird stuff, or if aliens happen to like to be around cities, I'm not sure, but it was kind of interesting. This is at, if you go to just search for UFO Sightings Map, you can type in your address and it will tell you how many sightings per year there have been near you. So if we were in the planetarium, I would ask this question of everyone. I guess it's, let's not take the time right now, but just think to yourselves, or if you're at home with other people, kind of have a little discussion. Do you believe that aliens have visited the Earth? See what your thoughts are. I will leave that to you and move on. This is a painting called the Madonna with Saint Giovannino from the 15th century. So this is the 1400s. It sure looks like there's an alien spacecraft up here. And here's a blow up of it in the lower right corner. And a shepherd and perhaps a dog, both looking up toward this alien spacecraft. Who knows? The 1997 lights that appeared above Phoenix, Arizona are a famous UFO sighting, and as far as I know, have not yet been explained, although dim lights in the distance are, could be an awful lot of things. Here is one that I just found this morning. It just came out on Reddit, and these are lights seen behind the International Space Station. You'll see the International Space Station up here on the upper right-hand corner. That's just a portion of the space station. And then you'll see these lights drift in front of the space station, or behind the space station, excuse me. And you'll notice that the lights are in a very specific formation, and that formation maintains its formation the entire time, unlike space junk that would be floating around. And in fact, a number of people had tried to look at databases and so on, and there were didn't seem to be any space junk around at the time. However, some other people looked at what the continuous feed from the space station was looking at during the time this was recorded. And it was actually looking at a zoomed in view of the Pacific Ocean, not the space behind it. Well, that kind of gives you a bit of a clue. And the Earth is dark because it's nighttime. And it turns out that fishermen use very bright xenon lights to lure a specific species of Japanese flying squid known as Todorodes pacificus to the surface so they can catch them. And these are what those boats look like. And in fact, those lights have been spotted a number of times before from the International Space Station. So pretty quickly after this was uploaded to the internet, some people said, we've seen this before. These are these fishing boats trying to lure these squid to the surface. So that one didn't pan out too well, but there are others. Here's one that I call the Tic Tac from the airplane. Some of you may remember what Tic Tacs are. They're these little breath mints that I'm going to hold this up to my camera. I don't know if my camera is on where you can see me or not, but I'll show it later when my picture will be a little bigger. But it's just a little white cylinder. And this was filmed by someone looking out their window with an iPhone 10. And it looks a lot like the Tic Tac or some of the other UFO sightings. As it turns out, he was able to identify it as an airplane, although the phone video, it's kind of hard to tell what that is. But this is one airplane, a person with a cell phone looking out the window at another airplane, and that's what the other airplane looks like if it's far enough away. So you can see how that could give rise to a number of questionable things. But it gets more interesting when you look at the official government report. So this is the preliminary assessment, unidentified aerial phenomena, written by produced by the Office of the Director of National Intelligence. The classified version of this report was given to Congress in early June, and the unclassified report was released on the 25th of June, so just a couple of weeks ago. There are many sources who have said that the classified report has just a few more details, but no additional significant information, and their conclusions are the same as the unclassified report. Well, I'll leave it to you to decide if you want to believe that, but I'm going to go through the unclassified report because that's what we have access to, and see what this Department of Defense Unidentified Aerial Phenomena Task Force came up with. Now, sorry about all the words, but I got to get all these words in. So each one of these points is actually important. So I'm going to hopefully not read them, but at least mention each one for those of you who are going cross-eyed and falling asleep now. The data is limited primarily to US government reporting of incidents between November of 2004 and March of 2021. And there's a very specific reason for those dates. A comprehensive reporting system was developed by the US Navy in 2019 and then adopted by the US Air Force. This format captures details of each incident and the sensors that were triggered by each incident. Now, this new process better captures unidentified aerial phenomena, UAP, events. So the majority of events that are included in this report are from that 2019 to 2021 timeframe. The reason it goes back to November 2004 is because they explicitly wanted to include some videos that I'm going to show you in just a few minutes of UFOs that were captured by fighter jets off the coast, mostly of California. And the earliest one was in 2004, hence the starting date. Now the conclusions. Most UAPs in the data set probably do, and why they believe probably, I don't know, but probably do represent physical objects. It turns out it's 80 out of 144, which is 56%. So slightly more than half. And the reason they say they may probably represent physical objects is that they registered across multiple sensors. Some set of a combination of radar, infrared detectors, electro-optical systems, weapons seekers, visual observations, but more than one. 44% then may not be physical because they were only captured by one sensor. And there could be a sensor malfunction or somebody wasn't sure what they were seeing or whatever. In 18 incidents, the UAPs displayed an unusual movement pattern or flight characteristic. Those are the most interesting ones. The authors of the report say that probably multiple types of UAPs exist requiring different explanations. We'll talk about those in a minute. And that the new reporting system will allow for a more sophisticated analysis of UAPs and deepen our understanding. More time and funding is required to be able to collect even more of these reports, look for patterns, and then really analyze them in depth. The resolved UAPs are most likely to fall into 5 categories. Yeah, I can't do anything about that. We have a technical thing we're dealing with here. Okay, one is airborne clutter. Birds, balloons, recreational drones, and plastic bags floating around the wind. There are also natural atmospheric phenomena, ice crystals, moisture, thermal fluctuations on infrared and radar systems. Either US government or industry developmental programs, new aircraft, for example, classified military development programs. And I'll show you some examples of some of those in the past that were noted at Area 51 and gave rise to a number of UFO reports during the time these tests were active. Project Mogul balloon in Roswell would fall into that category. Foreign adversary systems. This is the one that really has the DoD concerned, and part of the reason the study was actually undertaken. These are technologies that may have been developed by China, Russia, or another nation. Advanced technologies that we don't have or understand from the US perspective. And then category 5, other, is phenomena that displays unusual characteristics or sensor signatures. And in many cases, alien spacecraft would be expected to fit in the other category. Now, I promised you some examples of aircraft developed at Area 51 that were classified at the time they were developed, and they were test flown in that area and gave rise to a number of UFO reports. The U-2 spy plane in the 1950s, actually. The SR-71 Blackbird spy plane in the 1960s, it's just shown in the upper right, has an unusual shape to it. The F-117 Nighthawk stealth fighter bomber, which saw a lot of action in Iraq and other places, it really looks unusual. I mean, it almost looks like a triangle flying wing. And the Boeing YT-118G bird of prey stealth jet. This is a Boeing test project. And it looks a bit like a Klingon bird of prey, so hence the name. But it has a very unusual shape for an aircraft. Some people may know Area 51 as the Groom Lake Proving Grounds. I'll also mention that the SR-71 holds the record for the fastest and highest altitude jet aircraft, not using a rocket engine, and was used for surveillance. There are other advanced technology aircraft that people have found either in rumors or in, let me see, I'm going to try this. Can you turn your volume on and let's see, can you hear me at all when I'm doing that? Nothing, okay. All right, we're playing with our volume here, but we're going to have to do this. I've got a little bit of feedback that we're stuck with at the moment. Okay, these advanced technology aircraft, there have been budget lines in congressional budget papers. There have been supposed sightings. There have been supposed rumors of these things being developed. But here are a couple of them that have a lot of rumors about them. One is on the left, a vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that would be used for inserting special operations forces onto the battlefield. And on the right, the Aurora Mach 6 Plus attack aircraft, very, very fast attack aircraft. So whether they exist or not, we don't know, but a lot of rumors about them. So the current data in this report includes 144 reports from US government sources. 56%, 80 of these reports involved observations with multiple sensors. In 18 incidents, as I mentioned, unusual UAP movement patterns or flight characteristics were noted. For example, they remain stationary in the wind, move against the wind, maneuver abruptly, move with considerable speed without discernible means of propulsion, and so on. Further analysis is required to determine if these involve breakthrough technologies or if there's some other phenomena at work here. In 11 incidents, pilots reported near misses with these reported objects. Only one of these 144 reports, only one incident was the object positively identified, and that was a large falling deflating balloon. And again, they reiterate that continued funding and research is required to identify UAPs. And now the Navy, Air Force, and FAA are reporting to the UAPTF task force. This is the task force collecting this data, this database. And they need advanced collection platforms. They would really like to see some survey platforms from the DoD and the intelligence community be used for this, rather than just random reports by pilots who say, "What's that over there?" and then turn their camera in that direction. They'd rather have a wider survey of such objects. Okay, I'm going to start showing a couple of videos. Before I do that, I'm going to stop sharing so that I can explain a couple things to you. Okay, hopefully I'm a little bigger on your screen now. Again, I wanted to show you the one of the videos I'm going to be showing in just a few minutes is sometimes called the Tic Tac video. And again, it's because it looks like one of these little breath freshener Tic Tacs, which if you want to see a little bigger, you could look at this way. And it kind of would look something like this. Of course, if you look at it in 3 dimensions, it might have a totally different shape. These are iPods. But there are a couple other things that you will see. You will see some images from image intensifier cameras and from thermal imaging cameras. And I wanted to show you, for those who may not be familiar, what the difference is between those. So a image intensifier camera, here's an example of one. And what it does is it has an image intensifier tube. The photons come in through one end and are amplified by the electronics in this tube to a screen that is shown on the side where your eye goes. And you just hold it up to your eye and look at things in the dark. I wanted to give you an idea of what that looks like. If you could hit the lights for me. Let me turn this on. And let me see if I can hold it up to the camera. You can see it's not real dark in here, but it's not all that much light. If I hold this up to the camera, you should be able to tell that I am, much brighter. There we go. Okay, you can kind of see my eyes and my nose. In fact, it'd be nice if I could turn the intensity down a little bit. It's just way too bright. Now, an image intensifier looks at reflected light. What I'm going to do is I'm going to keep it against the camera lens, and I'm going to pull my hand over it. And I don't know if you can see or not. There are little sparkles in the field of view, and at the top, and those sparkles are from random electrons in this intensifier tube. They're not stars or something else physical. They're just random noise from the intensifier tube. And you'll see that in one of these videos. So let me turn this off. That depends on reflected light. The light, ambient light in the room, reflecting on my face, it just amplifies that. It's sensitive to infrared. Infrared, we normally think of as heat, but it's below the wavelength that your eyes normally see. And so things that are light that is bounced off my face in the infrared shows up on this. And so even if you couldn't, if you had an illuminator, which this does have actually, I could in fact turn on the infrared illuminator, and it looks like just a little tiny light to you, but through the intensifier tube, that looks like a blinding spotlight and goes out hundreds of yards. And that's what security cameras do, similar things. So that depends on reflected infrared light. And that's called an image intensifier, for example, or a night vision scope. Now let me show you what something looks like that is actually looking at the infrared, the heat emitted, the infrared light emitted by my face or by jet rocket engines or jet engines or airplane engines or anything that's hot, a missile engine, something like that. This is a, come on, I just hit the button and turned it off. There it is. Okay. See if I can hold this up without hitting any buttons. Okay, there we go. Now, if I remove my hand from the lens, now you can see that I look fairly bright here, except for my glasses. My glasses are actually pretty good insulators, and they're kind of insulating things. Can't do this without getting my hand in the way. All right, now this is not reflected infrared light. This is infrared light that is originating within my body. This is heat, basically. And if I were to hold my hand up to the lens, you can see that my hand is actually has quite a bit of heat associated with it. If I put my hand inside of a barbecue grilling glove and put that over the lens, you can see it's much colder. So it's not reflected external light, it's light generated internally. That is called a Flir system. Flir stands for forward-looking infrared. That's the modern definition. Can you get the light again for me, please? Thanks. So that is forward-looking infrared is the kind of thing you would have on an aircraft that might be used as targeting sensors for identifying enemy aircraft, launching missiles, that kind of thing. And it's kind of replaced, as far as the military is concerned, the old-fashioned image intensifier tubes. Now, one of these infrared or thermal vision systems, heat-seeking vision systems, might look something like this if it were on its own, not attached to a cell phone. But it would be installed in the sensor pod of an aircraft. Okay, I am now going to reshare and go back to the presentation. Okay, let me mention something about this. This was a pyramid-shaped UFO hovering over the warship USS Russell at night in July of 2019 off the coast of San Diego. It was filmed by an off-duty FA-18 pilot with his cell phone and a night vision monocular, something that looks very much like that first one that I showed you, night vision monocular. So it's looking at reflected light or light bulbs, spotlights from something, that kind of thing. And this was confirmed by the Pentagon as part of the UAPTF task force and listed as unknown. Here is a video that Nick West posted about this. See if I can start it.
This UFO video does not show a pyramid. There's a triangle shape, but that looks exactly like an effect caused by a bright light being out of focus and a night vision camera with a triangular iris like this one, or a triangular lens cover like this one. This effect is known as bokeh. It's also probably a plane because it blinks in the same pattern as a Boeing 737, and the ship, the USS Russell, was directly under the route for planes flying into Los Angeles from Hawaii and Asia. There are a couple more triangles in the scene. Those are probably stars, because they look exactly like stars taken with a night vision camera out of focus with a triangular iris. There's some bright lights at the start of the Pyramid UFO video. That's probably Jupiter and some stars because it matches exactly where Jupiter and some stars were on that day. They don't show up as sharp triangles because the cameraman has not zoomed in yet, but they look the same shape as the supposed flashing pyramid does when it first arrives. There's some points of light in the video that sometimes look like stars. They are not stars. They are random noise, stray electrons in the image intensifier tube. They change from frame to frame. They don't show up as triangles as they form in the image intensifier tube, which is behind the iris, so they are not affected by it. Jesse3959 on Metabunk took a look at his night vision binocular and discovered, hey, it has a triangular iris. I asked him for some footage of lights and stars and he delivered. Then using a styrofoam holder, he recorded the output with his phone. He changed the focus, and that changed the size of the triangles. And when he filmed the darker sky, you get exactly the same faint stars and sparkly noise that you do in the Pyramid UFO video. Then, another breakthrough. A friend told me he had a military-style PVS-14 night vision binocular. He taped a triangular hole on the front and got just the same results as with the triangular iris. Lights took on a triangular shape that changed with focus. Stars looked like the faint objects in the Pyramid UFO video, and we get the exact same noise. This PVS-14 footage also shows a circular glare around the triangular bokeh, something that appears in the Pyramid UFO footage and that people thought was evidence that it was actually triangular shaped. But it's not. The circular glare is just spreading light. It happens all through the camera so it looks round and even. The triangle is a different thing, only affected by the front iris or lens cover, so the triangle and circle are independent. So why couldn't the Navy figure this out? Why did they confirm the videos were real? Why does it show up on a slide for the UAP task force described as an unknown unmanned aerial system at 700 feet? Well, the key thing here is that the task force investigates sightings that were initially unidentified. This includes examinations of incursions that are initially reported as UAP when the observer cannot immediately identify what he or she is observing. And I think that's what we're seeing here. These are some lights in the sky that a Navy observer filmed with an accidentally out-of-focus night vision binocular and a phone. Initially, they were unidentified. Maybe they still are. Maybe some were Chinese drones at 700 feet. Maybe some were misidentified planes heading for Los Angeles. But one thing is pretty clear. They were not pyramids.
Okay, so that gives you an idea of the type of thing that Nick West does, and you'll see him later on as well. He just tries to find some possible explanation. It's no guarantee that his explanation is correct, but he shows that it doesn't have to be aliens. Okay, now here are the really famous ones. Some of you have probably seen these before. This is called Flir. Again, remember, that stands for forward-looking infrared from this fighter jet. Then gimbal because of the way the camera was mounted, and go fast because it's something that goes quickly. And this is Nick West's analysis of those. The first one, sometimes called the Tic Tac because of its shape, I should mention to you on these, the field is reversed. I forgot to show you how that works, but instead of having a bright object with a thermal camera, you're looking again at a thermal image, and the thermal image is sometimes stands out better if you invert the colors of the monitor so that instead of a bright white, it's black, and the background that normally would be black is white. So they just reverse those two, black for white, and so the black object is the very hot object.
All right, well, let's start with the Flir video. That's the oldest video. The Flir video is actually a very small video. It's like 200 pixels wide or something like that. Very, very small and blurry. And it shows like a dark dot in the distance, dark kind of shape. And the camera operator who's in this jet following this thing is cycling through different cameras trying to get a better look at it, but you never really get any good look at it. The object itself, if you pay attention to what's going on, the object itself never actually moves from the center of the screen. It does appear to move, but that's only because the camera is changing. It changes lenses between like a narrow field of view and a wider field of view, or it's changing between the infrared mode and the TV mode, the visible light mode. So whenever it has to change from one camera to another, it loses the lock on the object and has to reacquire it. So what we're seeing basically is an essentially static object. It is actually moving. It's because you can see that the camera is tracking from right to left, because you can see the numbers, the heading at the top of the screen changes. So it is moving. So it's entirely consistent with it being a plane that's very far away, probably somewhere in the range of 50 to 100 miles away. And the jet that's following it, again, perhaps doesn't realize just how far away it is and thinks that it's a little bit closer and hence moving a little bit differently, or perhaps is a bit smaller than it actually is. It could be a quite large plane 100 miles away.
Right. So why? So if I can ask, why didn't they catch that on the radar then? Why weren't they able to identify that as an aircraft already?
It wasn't where they thought it was. It's the same thing with the Chilean case. Radar's great if you know where to look, but if you're looking in like sector A and it's in sector Q, then you're not going to see it in sector A. So if they were just looking in a range of say like 40 miles in front of them, they're not going to see it on the radar. He got a ping on his radar, I think, and you see the little range crop up, but it shows 99.99, which means it wasn't able to get an actual range distance, which could mean that it was blocking it somehow, but it could also just mean that it was just too far away to get an accurate reading. I think that's probably what happened. He thought there was something close to him. He asked the ship perhaps if there was something next to them, and they looked directly in front of him and didn't see it, but it was really over here, so that's why they didn't see it.
And that one definitely looks the least strange of the three, I would say, as looking at it from the outside. So moving on to gimbal, which we seem to see something which looks like it's rotating. There's two blobs. You've talked about this in a few of your videos over on your channel, which I will make sure to link down below. But tell us, what do you think is going on with the gimbal video?
What I think is going on with the gimbal video is that it's actually the glare from the infrared, So the engines of a plane are very, very hot, and they show up in the heat-sensitive camera essentially as bright lights. Now, in this video, it's inverted, so hot is black. So it looks like a black object, and you've got the shape of the glare. Now, you're familiar with in astronomy, you often see what looks like a cross over a star or a celestial object of some sort because of the diffraction effect. And this is actual, the aperture of the camera has an effect on what the glare looks like. And what's happening, I think, here is that you're getting essentially a flying saucer-shaped glare, which I've actually replicated with little cameras I have on my own. And it's because it's so bright, because the engine is so hot, it's obscuring the actual outline of the plane, which you might see in the infrared, which wouldn't be very hot anyway, so you wouldn't see very much of it. So all you're seeing is this glare of the engine. Now, where it gets confusing is where it seems to rotate.
Yeah.
And this is quite a difficult thing to explain to people, but essentially it's kind of a limitation of the camera system that they have. They mount it in such a way that it can only rotate along its forward axis, and it can only do a kind of an up and down rotation around one horizontal axis. And to be able to track something, you actually need 3 axes of rotation. So for it to go left to right, when it's actually tilted down a bit, it actually ends up having to rotate the camera, and that rotation is internally corrected for. But because they're doing an internal correction of the rotation, this means that the scene doesn't rotate, but anything that's an optical artifact within the camera does rotate. So the shape of the glare itself rotates. And this is something I've replicated this exact thing with camera setups of my own, using like a small camera mounted on an arm and rotating it, and then applying derotation. And you see this exact same thing, a kind of a saucer-shaped glare that rotates independently of the horizon, which happens to be my garage in the video I made. But yeah, this is something you can demonstrate that it happens. It makes perfect sense. if you look at the actual mechanics of the gimbal system. The gimbal, if you look at the patents, they describe that they have a gimbal lock correction that happens between plus or minus 3 degrees, around 0. And that's the exact point that this rotation happens, around 3 degrees.
And there's kind of an aurora, almost like a white glow almost around that as well. What do you think that's caused by?
Yeah, they describe it as a glowing aura. I think they think of it as some kind of they think it's some kind of force field or something. But that's actually a very common thing that you see in infrared heat sensitive camera footage. It's the sharpening artifact. It's an unsharp mask, which you probably use in astrophotography sometimes. It sharpens the boundaries between dark and light regions, so it makes the edges of things be more defined and helps you see things. And I did a little video and I showed lots of examples of this happening. There's even one of a little girl dancing, and she has this exact same aura around her because it's been filmed in this heat-sensitive camera with this filter turned on. They're using a thing called an unsharp mask, which is just a very common type of sharpening filter. It's very easy to implement.
And now the last one is Go Fast, which has really extraordinary commentary by the pilots who really seem to be amazed by what they're seeing.
Oh my gosh, dude! Wow, look at it fly!
And that thing does look like it's like a bat through hell, but it's just a kind of a tiny speck. What is it that we're looking at there?
Yeah, it looks like it's moving really fast, and it looks like it's very close to the water, and this is what people have presented as being. But if you do the math, which isn't very complicated, you can actually use the numbers that are on screen because it has a range number. You have the altitude of the plane itself, which I think is 22,000 feet. So, and you have an angle down that the camera is looking down. So if you know how high the plane is, you know how far away the object is, and you know the angle down, then you can just use the sine of the angle.
Just trigonometry, yeah.
Yeah, it's just simple. You can simply work out how far away it actually is and how far below the plane it is. And it ends up being halfway between the plane and the water. So it's actually at about, I think, 11 or 12,000 feet. And once you know that, you can also figure out how fast it's going. You can do a kind of 3D recreation of it, which I did. And it doesn't actually have to be moving very fast. It can be as slow as, I think, 40 knots. And the fastest it would be going is actually more like 100 knots. And that range of speeds is quite a reasonable relative speed differential between the wind at 11,000 feet and the wind at 22,000 feet. Because the wind at 22,000 feet can be moving very, very fast, whereas the wind at 11 could be moving slow and or in a different direction. So what it looks like to me is something that's moving at wind speed, and the most likely thing is a balloon. And from that, an even more likely thing is that it's a loose weather balloon. It could possibly be a very large bird. People, make fun of me for suggesting this, but there is a possibility that it could be something like a pelican, like a large enough bird, if it's well insulated. I think it's an unlikely thing just because it got pinged on the radar and it looks cold. But it's possible. But I think the most likely thing that it's just a balloon that is in between the plane and the ocean. And because it's at this halfway point between the plane and the ocean and hardly moving, the apparent speed of the balloon over the ocean is the same as the speed of the jet itself, which is moving, I think, something like 350 miles an hour. So it looks like it's an object that's zipping along the surface of the ocean at 350 miles an hour, where in fact it's just a balloon drifting at 1,100 feet over the ocean.
And the radar pinged this, so does that give you any kind of size constraint on it, the fact that the radar saw it?
And the radar itself doesn't, well, not really, because if radar targets can be very small, you can have targets that are just like little retroreflectors, which are very, very small. If you know what type of thing it was, it would give you some idea of how big it was, the strength of the return. But that's not something that's actually shown up on the radar. You can tell, though, from the field of view of the camera and the distance to the object how big it is. And I think I worked it out as being somewhere in the range of, I think, 6 to 12 feet across. So not particularly big, and something that is kind of consistent with a weather balloon type thing.
Okay, now after these since these videos have been declassified a couple of years ago, no, actually it was just last year, that there have been subsequent interviews with two of the F-18 Hornet aircraft pilots for that very first video, the Flir Tic Tac video, and there involved two F-18 airplanes that were on training maneuvers from the USS Nimitz. And each plane had a pilot in the front and a weapons officer in the back. Of the two planes, the lead pilot, Commander David Fravor, firmly believes the object is unexplainable and is some type of advanced technology. The training pilot, this was a training pilot in 2004, is now Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, is ambivalent, and she seems to believe that alternate explanations are quite reasonable, like the ones that Nick West gave. So there you have that. Now, we do have an interesting website that has claimed that aliens no longer visit the Earth, they used to, but they don't anymore due to an allergy to cell phones and electromagnetic force EMF signals. So they claim on this website, you can look up boingboing.net, aliens no longer visit. Humans have long benefited from the help from alien life forms. They taught us how to make fire, possibly introduced the virus that gave us consciousness, and even invented Febreze. Recently, however, we haven't been seeing much proof of alien life. They are too sensitive to our EMF radiation pollution. Okay, well, I'm going to close with a few things that are also happening in terms of searching for extraterrestrial intelligence. The SETI Institute, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, is a real scientific institute. We had a talk on that this past spring here in the PEEC series. The SETI Institute uses a dedicated Allen telescope array in the mountains of California to search for narrowband radio transmissions that would indicate technically competent beings elsewhere in the galaxy. They have not yet found interesting radio beacons, but they've only looked at the very, very tiny portion of space, because they have to look at it for long periods of time, several days maybe in one spot, and then go to the next spot, and it's a narrow beam, so they can only look at a little tiny portion of space, of the sky. Now the SETI researchers are looking for, or gearing up, preparing to look for pollution and solar panels on exoplanets. The idea here is that if they look for absorption features of chlorofluorocarbons, these are man-made things that should not appear in nature. We have an ozone hole over the southern part of the Earth, over Antarctica, that is related to these things. So they give off, well, not give off, but they absorb radiation in a very peculiar way, which should be detectable by the James Webb Space Telescope, which should be launched next fall. They couldn't be seen by existing telescopes, but the James Webb would be able to see them, hopefully. Solar panels, turns out, absorb light of a certain wavelength and reflect the rest of the light. The spectral edge of their reflected light, the wavelength at which their reflection stops, is different from the red edge produced by vegetation. And so solar panels could be especially useful on the day side of tidally locked planets. So, for example, the most common stars in our galaxy are red dwarf stars, very small, dim red stars, such as Proxima Centauri. The closest star to our solar system is a red dwarf star, and it does have planets around it that are in the habitable zone where liquid water could exist. Now, they are tidally locked, like the moon is locked to the Earth, where we only see one face of the moon because its orbit is exactly the same as its rotation period. And so we only see that one side. That would be true probably for many of these planets around red dwarf stars, but that means one side is continuously facing the star, the opposite side is facing away from the star. So it's going to be cold, whereas the star-facing side is going to be hot and be perfect for solar panels. And then the intelligent civilizations could be in the band around the planet between the light and the dark sides. So they're going to be looking for that when the James Webb Telescope comes online. I'm not going to spend much time on this, just that there's a statistical paper out there from June of 2020, about a year old now, where it assumes that Earth is not special, i.e. we're not alive because an asteroid hit the Earth because of dinosaurs or whatever. So nothing really special about the Earth compared to any place else. And it has a certain weak, well, so-called weak assumption that the planet forms intelligent life after 5 billion years, but not before 5 billion years old. That was true on Earth, but may or may not be true elsewhere, but that's their assumption. And the lower limit to a civilization's radio lifetime is 100 years, which is about what it's been on the Earth. And we're now moving into other things like cable television, for example, instead of broadcast television, and laser diode cables for telecommunications, and lasers for point-to-point telecommunication with satellites and so on. So the summary of the statistical analysis is that there could be somewhere between -32 and 175. This is statistical, remember. So say 0 to 175, with the most probable value at 36 civilizations. If there were 36 civilizations in our galaxy, they would be at most 17,000 light years away. And it's probably worth pointing out that the Voyager 1, the fastest spacecraft we have so far, has traveled 0.5% of a light year in 43 years. And yet the nearest civilization could be 17,000 light years away. Most likely hosted by M dwarf stars, and they would be undetectable by us in the foreseeable future. So that's just one paper. The assumption that the Earth is not special is challenged by those who believe the Earth's specific history has allowed for life. So for example, a collision apparently occurred during the early time period of the Earth's formation by an object roughly the size of Mars. And that collision caused the Earth to remelt, and for the material to be split off to form the moon. And that moon stabilizes our rotation axis to between 22 and 24 degrees tilt, which gives rise to our current seasons. If our moon were not there, perhaps the tilt would not be as stable. That might cause glaciation. It could cause weather issues and so on for life to develop. So some people would claim that there are some special things about our Earth. Others claim that other planets have stable rotation without such a moon as ours. So, there are examples for both ways. Now, the James Webb Telescope that I mentioned is scheduled to be launched in October of 2021. It's been delayed many times. Who knows if it'll make it, but it will hopefully identify atmospheric gases of exoplanets to look for biological signatures and maybe technological signatures. And finally, I'll mention that if the nearest aliens are thousands of light years away, then to visit each other, we would need to travel faster than light. And at the moment, our current understanding of physics makes that extremely unlikely. There's no known way to travel faster than light or to fold space-time. There was an attempt for a warp drive engine that didn't violate general relativity, but it requires something called negative energy or negative mass, of which we have never had any hint of. The last thing, I'm just going to skip that and just do this. There's a paper that was just published a couple of weeks ago by Jason Wright, an astronomer and an astrophysicist at Penn State, and Caleb Scharf, an astrobiologist at Columbia University. And they made some specific assumptions. They did a computer simulation assuming that civilization has a drive to colonize other nearby planets that are reasonable in terms of their life support. The speed is limited to our current space probes, New Horizons, Voyager, so on, about 6 miles per second. So no warp drives or anything like that. Aliens are patient. As a galaxy rotates, they wait for a star to move closer to them before colonizing. And that's just the galaxy rotation that brings one star close to another. A migration ship is launched every 10,000 years, so that's not very soon. The maximum age of the civilization is 100 million years. Now, some people would argue that that's kind of long, but who knows? Ships traveling no further than 10 light years. So there's a limit to how far the ships, even colony ships, could go. The conclusions is that such a civilization would spread across our galaxy in 1 billion years, which is only about 8 or 9% of the age of our galaxy. The highest concentration, of course, is in the galactic center. So the red dots or the pink dots are the civilization spreading throughout the galaxy. And in only a billion years, it actually spreads pretty far. So that gives rise to the question of something called the Fermi Paradox. If there were such civilizations out there, why are they not knocking at our door right now? Is there some limit to the length of civilizations? Do they destroy themselves? Are they destroyed by climate change or something? Is there a galactic empire that tolerates no rivals and enslaves or eliminates all new civilizations? What is it that's keeping them from doing what we just saw in that simulation? And finally, as a summary, there are billions of galaxies in the universe, billions of stars in our galaxy, most of which seem to form with planetary systems. It appears likely that many such systems have planets in the Goldilocks habitable zone. We're guessing maybe 20%, based on the survey done by Kepler and other spacecraft. Complex carbon molecules exist wherever we look in space. The building blocks of life are there. If the environmental conditions similar to those on the early Earth would be abundant in space, and they seem to be, as far as we can tell from our observations currently, then some people believe it is inevitable for life to arise from these conditions. There's no reason to think that Earth is special, with some, people having exception to that. Colonization may be limited by the speed of light. If life is not out there, then we might expect that abiogenesis, moving from chemical reactions to actual life, is not as inevitable as many people believe. Or there's some great filter that prevents intelligent life from colonizing the galaxy. In either case, so far, we have no unconditional proof that intelligent aliens have ever visited the Earth. We have at least 4 of the videos you've seen that were in that list of 144 incidents investigated by this task force. And we have 4 videos that have perfectly reasonable explanations associated with them, yet the task force said they were unexplained. So what to make of that, I'm not completely sure, but there do seem to be other alternatives around. And that's all I have. So if anyone has questions, I'd be glad to see what I can do with them.
Okay, thank you, Rick, for that fascinating talk. We don't have any questions in the chat right now, but please type your questions in to the chat and I'll relay them to Rick.
Anybody out there still awake?
Maybe we're just awe-inspired and wondering. So I don't know, part of me wants there to, to find life in the universe, certainly in my lifetime. I don't know if we'll find intelligent life in the universe in my lifetime or prove it, but and then there's a part of me that's afraid of it. Like, what if they are coming to take over? Yeah, and I'm very discouraged when I think about these things by the speed of light being absolute and how long it takes to get anywhere. So it is interesting in your last video that they've calculated that if you send a ship every 10,000 years, you can colonize the galaxy, even going the speed of light. That is very interesting. So that doesn't make it sound impossible.
Yeah, of course, that does take tremendous resources, money or whatever their equivalent might be, to build huge colonization ships that would be able to do that. And that was subject of another talk I did 6 months ago or so. But those kinds of things at least the assumptions in that calculation were not extreme at all. They were pretty conservative. So that
Yeah,
is interesting. Most of the astronomers that I've talked to about this, some limited number, um, most of them believe that there is life out there. They see no reason why there should be a limit to life, and in fact, maybe even in our own solar system and Enceladus and so on. But they are very skeptical of intelligent life, either because something special may have happened on Earth to form that intelligence, or because of some other filter, and civilizations destroying themselves or whatever it may be. But that's kind of the prevailing opinion among the folks that I've talked to.
okay, well, we have lots of comments like, thanks, Rick, good job, awesome talk. And just wish to thank you. This is a comment. I do know a few people who have more credible scientific proof of visitings, and they would be happy to share those with you sometime. So I'll give you that name later, and you can try to connect with them. I have a question. How many of you viewers believe we have been visited by aliens? Well, we would need to do a poll to find the answer to that, but I don't know. And another question is, are there any amateur astronomers reporting UFOs?
There certainly are amateur astronomers reporting UFOs, and there are, trained observers, pilots, astronomers, other kinds of scientists that are reporting UFOs. Now, they're reporting them in the sense that some of the examples I gave you tonight, they are unidentified flying objects, or maybe not objects, maybe they're unidentified aerial phenomena, which could be natural phenomena and other things. And so many people see these things, they can't immediately explain them, therefore they're unidentified. One of the largest number of or objects that produces the largest number of UFO reports is actually the planet Venus. And now is a great time to see it. If you go out after dark in the west, if it's not cloudy, there is Venus hanging out there much brighter than anything else. And it really looks astounding, especially if you're driving along a road to the west and you see it up in front of you. Because of the micro motions of your eye, it looks like it's jumping all over the place. So there are many explanations for these things. Are there explanations for all of them? I don't know. There could certainly be some out there that cannot be explained. And that's exactly why this task force has existed, and it will continue to exist for a while, to try to see if there are other unexplained things out there. Maybe aliens, maybe Soviet or Chinese advanced reconnaissance aircraft of some sort.
Right. So the person who asked the question commented that the amateur astronomers may not be fooled by the Jupiter and Venus as much. So it's good to have some people that know the sky. They'll be fooled less often.
Yes, I think that is an excellent point. And I think it would be great if astronomers or amateur astronomers hear, or scientists in general, hear about such things, to take a few minutes and think about whether you can come up with a potential explanation. It may not be the explanation that's correct, but a possible explanation, like Nick West has done. I mean, for example, some of those explanations for videos that he gave, I have almost an identical night vision scope to the ones that he had access to. And I have a thermal imaging system, even though it's attached to my cell phone. But I would not have thought of some of the answers that he has. I'm familiar with the lens flare and a lot of those things, but I didn't know that the gimbal systems on aircraft were mounted in such a way that they had automatic derotation algorithms built into them. So there's just information I don't have that wouldn't have allowed me to try to explain those things, but other people do have that. And so I think getting them out there and letting other people take a look at those incidents is a great way of doing it.
Yeah, there's a comment again before I go to one more question. They said that all the images are blurry, and if they were in focus, we would not see aliens. So, yeah,
There
that's
may be something to that.
mhm, mhm. Another comment, I would love it if we were visited. Alas, we are in the galactic boondocks. I'm thinking of your picture, all the first places to be colonized are in the center of the galaxy there. Yeah.
That's right. We're pretty far out. And if we
Mhm.
were on the opposite end from where they started, might take them a while to get here.
Yeah, but there's some nasty stuff in the center of the universe or the galaxy.
Yeah, Carolyn was saying there's some nasty stuff in the center of the galaxy, so you might not want to actually live there around that black hole.
Yeah, Steve Becker has a question. He says maybe we are the first intelligent spacefaring civilization. Is that statistically very unlikely? I mean, we've been here 5 billion years. That's about how long it would take. We only have one data point, I guess.
Yeah, right. Hard to do statistics on one data point, but people have done that. In fact, they have done the statistics, and there's another paper that came out last year where they tried to use a very special kind of statistics. And what they did was they varied the input parameters, the initial assumptions, and ran lots of different simulations to try to see how long it would take for intelligent civilization to arise. First of all, for life to arise, and then for intelligence to arise from that. And they used, a lot of different parameters, not zero, which some people will say, well, we're the only ones because we're special and nobody else could do what we do. But if you don't make that assumption, it's not zero, it's some number. They ran a huge variety of different assumptions. And they did come up with some number, and I can't remember exactly what it was now, that suggested that after on the order of roughly 6 billion years, you would expect to see some small handful of civilizations. That's 6 billion years. Our galaxy appears to be on the order of 13 billion years old, 12 to 13 billion years old. If it's 13 billion years old, when you're talking about billions, it's kind of hard to, but
Same as the universe?
yeah, so that means, if it only took 6 billion years for life to arise, as it did on Earth was 5.5, then it seems statistically unlikely that we would be the first, because that should have happened 6 billion years ago. And we've had billions and billions of years since then for other civilizations to go through the same process. So that's the only concern with us being first, is that statistically, again, why are we special? What is it that caused this trigger that caused intelligent life to evolve here before it evolved anywhere else, when those other systems are much older than the Earth?
Right. Well, I have a question about the M dwarfs. A couple of times, you mentioned papers and scientists who think that it's most likely that these civilizations would arise on M dwarfs. My understanding of M dwarfs is they have a lot of magnetic activity and a lot of solar flares, and stars, planets in the habitable zone would be getting this radiation blasted at them all the time. So what would help them to to live on a place like that? Why is it so likely?
Yeah, well, the reason it's likely is pure statistics. If you look at the curve of the number of stars per mass, then you find that most of the stars in our galaxy are M dwarfs. There are far more M dwarfs out there than they are stars the size of our sun, and bigger stars are even less abundant. And so the abundance curve for star formation is such that it's heavily loaded toward the lower mass stars. And so there are far more red dwarfs out there than there are of solar type stars or other kinds of stars. So that's why they say that's where the most likely one would be, just from the statistics. Now, if you look at the physics of what would happen, you would either have to have some kind of life that is adapted to strong ultraviolet radiation or the solar flares, perhaps some kind of a significant magnetic field around the planet, but that only works for charged particles. But if you had a magnetic field around the planet, your biggest concern would be ultraviolet light. If it's ultraviolet, then perhaps organisms would evolve with either some resistance to ultraviolet or some kind of shield, or like a turtle shell or something, or maybe they would evolve underwater where the ultraviolet light only penetrates a small distance. The other thing is that most of those planets, they're so old that they're likely to be tidally locked. If they're tidally locked, one face is toward the planet, the other face is away from the planet. And so if you're not on the face toward the planet, you're not subject to all of those flares. That does leave a band around, the terminator between I shouldn't use that word, but anyway, the transition between the light and the dark side half of the planet. But if it has a significant atmosphere, people have done atmospheric hydrodynamic studies, and because of the tremendous heating on one side, that puts a lot of energy into that atmosphere and causes tremendous circulation currents. And that means that this little zone, if you will, between the light and the dark side might expand to be actually a much larger zone that could be habitable. Those
Sounds
are
really,
all, speculation at this point, but they're speculation supported by real physical simulation models.
sounds also like it to be very windy on the surface with
Yeah.
that circulation going on all the time.
Well, certainly windy up at the higher atmosphere. On the surface, I'm not sure. It depends on the
Right.
geometry of the surface.
I guess if the planet isn't rotating very fast, you have less Coriolis force that
True.
makes our weather. So that might play in their favor. Yeah, interesting. All right, I have a question about the research that goes on in the field of UAPs. Who are the major researchers in the field? Are they government, or are they university? Are they private? Who are the major?
Okay. Well, there are organizations that have been around for decades that are dedicated to collecting and investigating UFO reports. MUFON, I mentioned in one of the slides, which is something for UFO networking or something like that. There used to be a committee for investigation of the paranormal. UFOs was in there. There were some others. These were civilian committees supported by mostly people in their spare time. A few university professors were involved. They had very few resources and they didn't really have much to go on. There is a committee that's kind of dedicated to logically trying to debunk any kind of supernatural phenomena. And they actually have a lot of scientists involved, and they actually do some of these things as well. But the strongest one at this point should be this Department of Defense and now intelligence community, Air Force, and FAA committee that these things can be reported to. Now that the FAA is involved, civilian reports can also be incorporated, aircraft reports, but somebody standing on the ground seeing lights in the sky, not sure what happens with that. They're looking for some reports of things that are more than just someone seeing something they can't explain. And they particularly like it if there are multiple sensors like radar and infrared and visual and several of these kind of things together that provide things, and that's usually related to aircraft pilots or airports or something like that. So this group, if it continues to be funded, and if it's given time by Congress and the DoD to continue its work, is the type of group that is most likely, I would think, to be able to make some headway in trying to look at these. I'm really personally a bit disappointed that 4 of their, in their own admission, principal incidents they could not explain, and yet this guy in England, Nick West, on his spare time, was able to explain them. So that's not being off to a good start, I don't think. But in theory, they should have the resources and the personnel with the right training and so on to be able to do that. I would say you could just, if you want the other civilian, less, let us call it professional organizations, you can just do a web search, I'm sure, for UFO investigation organizations and come up with a whole list of them.
Mm-hmm. It seems like we might have been getting more and more of these sightings, and even with multiple sensors now that everyone has a camera, security cameras with infrared. You have 2 or 3 gadgets at your house that you could put to work. We have, wildlife cameras everywhere now that we're seeing pictures every night. So shouldn't we have had many, many more reports instead of about this, or are we getting more reports?
Actually, there is a website you can go to, and I had the graph, but I didn't include it in my my presentation, that shows UFO reports as a function of time.
Mm-hmm.
And the UFO reports actually peaked in the 90s and are decreasing now. Yeah, that was when the X-Files were on. And it's now decreasing. Now, it might be, they don't have data for the last couple of years. So it could be in the last couple of years, things may have turned around as people became interested in things like this congressional study, for example.
Right.
There may be additional ones, but until the last 2 years, the number of reports has actually been declining. And some people suggest that might be because we have so much light pollution, we can't see weird lights in the sky anymore. Other people have suggested that we do have these things and they are much better than they used to be. So someone mentioned a lot of out of focus images. Well, if you get better cameras and better video and everybody's carrying a phone around that can focus at infinity really well, you might start getting better photos of things that you thought were unidentified, and you say, shoot, I know what that is. So it's no longer a UFO.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe more of them are being identified. I honestly don't know. I'm not sure. I haven't looked into that.
Mm-hmm. Okay, are there any more questions out there can type them in the chat? We have one more comment that I didn't relay. It says, thank you so much for doing this. I enjoyed and appreciated the rationality of thought. So I agree with that. Thank you too.
Oh, that's good.
Yeah. Okay, I'm not seeing any more questions. Any last minute comments? Going once, going twice. Okay, well, I guess we will call it a night. And I want to thank you again so much, Rick, for sharing with us. And next week we have a talk, and this will actually be live in the PEEC Planetarium. Peter Polko, and he'll be giving a talk entitled Welcome to the Total Perspective Vortex. And it'll be about the scale of our solar system. And am I correct about that, Rick? Go ahead.
Yeah, one slight modification. Peter was supposed to come back from the Netherlands to clean out his apartment and do some things here in town. He used to be a postdoc here at the lab and had to leave unexpectedly on short notice because of a visa thing. And he was supposed to come back to give that talk and clean up some things in town. And it turns out that the US will not allow travel for individuals from the Netherlands because of COVID restrictions right now. So he was unable to get a visa to come to the US. And so I will be giving his talk for him. So next week you will be stuck with me in the planetarium, and I can mention a couple things about that. We'll use the planetarium to kind of zoom out and see where things are. But it's really difficult on these huge distances that we have and huge sizes of things to really get a good handle on it. So we're going to approach it from 3 or 4 different ways. We'll use the planetarium to zoom out, but I also have some movies that are some computer-generated 3D graphics of comparisons of various things, like a a city to a planet to a moon, you know, and stars and different kinds of stars, and trying to go out further and further away from things that we're used to. And the way they have the overlapping sizes, you can get a little bit of an idea of what's going on. And there's some great graphics videos, 3D graphics, CGI kind of videos that people have produced to show distances in astronomy. And so we'll show some of those as well as a few other things.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry that Peter couldn't make it, but I'm glad you'll be able to fill in the planetarium. So I see one hand raised, and I don't know if that is a question. And I don't know if this person can type into the chat instead. Should I ask them to unmute and see what happens?
Sure.
Okay. So the person who has their hand raised, if you would like to speak, you can.
Does the fact that the pictures are always so poor reflect the physics of the phenomenon, or is it censorship from the people who produce the report?
In this particular case, it's a limitation of the capability of the sensors. So one of these was from 2004, and these thermal imaging sensors were not that old at that point. You'll notice that the two from more recent years, 2000, I forget which one it was, but both of them are more recent, are much sharper. And so part of it has to do with they're not expecting to use these in this particular way, and so they didn't have a provision for making good sharp copies and things. I saw an interview with one of the pilots on that first video, and the way he described it, it was like they all wanted to go down and go to this monitor that they had to see the video afterwards, and they were like taking pictures off the monitor screen. So I think part of it has to do with these things are completely unexpected. So somebody whips out an instrument, whether it's a camera or a cell phone or a video or one of these sensors on a jet, and uses it for this purpose, which it was never intended for. And perhaps in the excitement, maybe not have used it to its best ability. So I think there's some of that extent here as well. So it's really kind of hard to say.
Okay, thank you for that question. Okay, so I think we really will call it now because it's getting close to 8:30. So thank you for staying on a little longer, Rick, and talking with us. And we'll be, hopefully some of us will be able to see you next week.
Okay,
all right,
thank you very much.
Yeah, so thanks everyone for tuning in, and have a good night.